My name's Jason, I'm 25, and if I'm being honest, I've never been the golden child in my family. That spot has always belonged to my younger sister, Emily. She's smart, outgoing, and knows how to win people over instantly. Growing up, it was obvious she was the favorite. At family dinners, my parents bragged about her grades, her awards, her friends, while I was the quiet one in the corner who had potential, but just didn't apply himself. It stung, but I learned to live with it. I poured myself into things no one in my family cared about, like starting a small business online, teaching myself skills, and building something of my own. They didn't really ask about it, so I didn't really talk about it. That brings me to the night of Emily's graduation party. The whole extended family was crammed into this rented hall, decorated with streamers, flowers, and photos of Emily from kindergarten all the way up to her senior year of college. I'll admit, she looked happy, radiant even, and she deserved recognition for finishing strong. But the way my family handled it, well, that's what burned. I was sitting quietly at a table near the back, just trying to blend in, when my Uncle Greg, loud, opinionated, and always looking for a spotlight, raised his glass and shouted, "Finally, someone in this family worth celebrating." The room erupted in laughter. People clinked their glasses, chuckled, even nodded. My dad smirked, and my mom didn't correct him. And me? I just sat there, silent, my face burning. It wasn't even the first time Greg had taken a jab at me. He'd made comments for years about me being the quiet one who'd probably live in his mom's basement forever. But this time, surrounded by the whole family, with everyone laughing at my expense, it cut deeper than usual. I forced a smile, even laughed weakly along with the others, but inside, I was spiraling. My thoughts were a storm. Anger, humiliation, and something else, resolve. For the first time, I didn't just want to swallow it down. I wanted them to know they weren't looking at the whole picture. They saw Emily's public victories, sure, but none of them knew what I'd been quietly building, step by step, while they brushed me aside. The night dragged on with speeches, toasts, and music. Cousins danced, a slideshow played, and I sat at my table, pretending to check my phone, running through what I might do. Part of me told myself not to ruin her night. This was Emily's moment, not mine. But another part of me, the part that had been silenced and mocked for years, kept whispering, "When is it your moment, Jason? When do you get to show them you're not who they think you are?" The tension inside me only grew worse when my dad got up to speak. He cleared his throat and said, "Emily, we're so proud of you. You've accomplished more in 4 years than some people." And here he glanced right at me. Manage in a lifetime. People chuckled again. My chest tightened so hard I thought I'd snap right there. My own father, the man who knew how hard I'd been working, even if he didn't understand it. I gripped my chair so tightly my knuckles went white. And then came the final straw. Emily, sweet as she usually was, decided to take a little jab too. During her speech, she said, "Thank you all for coming to celebrate me. I know not everyone here has something to celebrate, but I'm glad you came anyway." She smirked slightly in my direction. A small dig, maybe even meant as a joke, but to me it was the culmination of years of being dismissed. The laughter that followed was the last push I needed. I stood up slowly, heart hammering in my chest, and walked toward the stage. My cousins raised their eyebrows, and a few aunts whispered to each other. The DJ, clearly confused, lowered the music. I picked up the microphone Emily had just set down. First off, I began, my voice shaking at first but growing stronger. "Congratulations, Emily. You've worked hard, and you deserve this celebration." People nodded politely, waiting for me to step aside. But I didn't. Instead, I paused, scanning the room. All those faces, many smirking, many dismissive, suddenly looked uneasy. "But since we're all here, I want to share something," I continued, steadying my breath. For years, I've sat quietly while jokes were made at my expense. I've been called a failure, the one who never measured up, the one with nothing to celebrate. And I've let you believe that. I let you laugh, let you look down on me, because I thought maybe it wasn't worth correcting you. But tonight, since we're talking about accomplishments, I think it's time you all know the truth. The room fell silent. No clinking glasses, no whispering, just the soft hum of the air conditioning and every eye locked on me. And that's when I dropped the first hint, the spark that I knew would set the whole hall on fire. I leaned closer to the microphone, lowered my voice so they had to really listen, and said, "I've been keeping something from you. Something big. And after tonight, None of you will ever look at me the same way again. The silence deepened. My Uncle Greg actually set his glass down, his smirk faltering. My mom shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Emily blinked at me, clearly caught off guard. I smiled faintly, a mix of nerves and satisfaction, and added, "You want someone in this family worth celebrating? Well, maybe you should have been paying closer attention." I could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on me as I stood there holding the microphone. My palms were damp, but my voice had steadied. I wasn't backing down this time. For years, I'd been the quiet shadow in the room, but at that moment, every pair of eyes was on me, and I wasn't going to waste it. "I've been working on something," I said, pacing slowly across the stage. "Not school, not sports, not the things you all usually clap for. While you were laughing at me, calling me the disappointment, I was building. Nights when you thought I was wasting time in my room, I was teaching myself how to run a business. Days when you assumed I was unemployed, I was actually making connections. And while you've been treating me like I had nothing going on, I've been creating something bigger than any of you realize." There were whispers now. My Aunt Linda tilted her head, clearly skeptical. Greg crossed his arms, smirking again, like he was just waiting for me to embarrass myself further. Emily shifted uncomfortably, tugging at her dress. She clearly hadn't expected her little jab to ignite this kind of storm. I kept going, my voice gaining strength with every word. "I've kept quiet because I didn't think I owed anyone here an explanation. But tonight, after hearing the same jokes, the same dismissive comments, I think it's time. Because whether you like it or not, I've outgrown being the family punchline." My dad chuckled under his breath. Not loudly, but enough that I heard it. That one sound lit me up inside. It was like he was saying, "Here goes Jason again, trying to make himself look important." I gripped the microphone tighter and looked straight at him. "You always told me I wouldn't amount to anything," I said, my tone sharper now. "That I'd never measure up to Emily. You made it a family sport to compare us. Well, here's the truth, Dad. While Emily was finishing school, and again, congrats to her, I was working behind the scenes. And as of last month, my company hit its first million in revenue." Gasps broke out across the hall. A fork clattered onto a plate. Someone muttered, "What?" My mom's hand flew to her mouth. My cousin's eyes widened like they'd just been told Santa Claus was real again. Uncle Greg, though, laughed. Not the kind of laugh that comes from amusement, but one laced with disbelief. "A million? What? Selling video games in your basement?" he sneered. A few chuckles echoed around him, but not many. The tone in the room had shifted. There was tension now. Doubt, yes, but also curiosity. I didn't flinch. I'd expected the pushback. "Not video games, Greg. An online store. Products I researched, imported, marketed, and sold. I worked every single night when everyone else was sleeping. I learned how to design, advertise, and negotiate. And now, I employ 6 people. Real jobs. Real paychecks. I have contracts lined up for next year worth more than you've probably earned in the last 5. That last line landed harder than I expected. Greg's smirk wavered, and he glanced around, as if searching for someone to back him up. No one did. The energy in the room was changing. Some faces still skeptical, but others watching me with a new kind of focus. Emily looked at me, her expression complicated. Pride? Jealousy? Maybe both. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but nothing came out. I wasn't done. "You all laughed at me for years, and I let you. I let you call me the disappointment because I thought proving you wrong wasn't worth it. But now, standing here, I realize something. It's not just about me. It's about the way you treat people who don't fit your mold. The way you decide who's worthy of respect and who isn't. And I'm telling you right now, you've been wrong about me." The silence was thick, almost suffocating. My heart pounded, but instead of shame, I felt a rush of clarity. Then my dad stood up. Slowly, deliberately. His face was unreadable, which somehow made it worse. He adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and said, "Jason, if this is true, then why haven't we heard about it before? Why keep it a secret unless you're making it up?" There it was. The challenge. The same doubt he'd cast over me since I was a teenager. And I knew this was the moment everything could turn. I met his gaze, steady and unblinking. "Because I didn't think you deserved to know," I said quietly. The room gasped again. My mother whispered my name, horrified. Emily covered her mouth. Greg muttered something under his breath. And before anyone could respond, I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope I had debated bringing all night. Inside were copies of the business articles that had just been published about my company, complete with photos of me, the logo, the revenue figures. I'd printed them out not because I planned to use them, but as a reminder to myself of how far I'd come. I held the envelope up. But since you're all so quick to laugh, maybe it's time you see the proof. I walked toward the center of the hall, the envelope in my hand, the entire family watching me with wide eyes. My father's face had gone pale, my uncle's smirk was gone, and Emily looked like she didn't know whether to hug me or cry. I stopped in the middle of the room, about to open the envelope and show everyone exactly what I'd been hiding. The tension was electric. Some people leaned forward, others whispered, and I could feel the weight of every ounce of doubt and ridicule I'd carried my whole life about to explode. And just as I started to pull the papers free, someone's voice rang out from the back of the hall. "Jason, wait." The entire room turned toward the voice. It was my grandfather's voice, strong, clear, cutting through the noise like a bell. Everyone turned in unison toward the back of the hall, where he was slowly rising from his chair. My grandfather, Robert, wasn't the type to involve himself in family squabbles. He was a retired engineer, quiet, observant, always the one who sat silently at gatherings and only spoke when something truly mattered. Which is why the moment he stood up, the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. "Jason," he said again, his eyes fixed on me. "Before you show those papers, I need to say something." The envelope trembled slightly in my hand. My chest tightened. My grandfather never interrupted anyone, especially not at an event like this. Part of me wanted to wave him off, to finally claim my moment without interference. But another part of me knew his words carried weight in this family. When Robert spoke, people listened. I lowered the envelope just a little, still clutching it. "What is it, Grandpa?" My voice was steady, but inside I was tense. He walked slowly toward me, the shuffle of his shoes on the polished floor echoing in the silence. The room felt frozen in time. Cousins leaning forward, Emily biting her lip, my Uncle Greg with his arms still crossed, though his expression had slipped into unease. My father shifted impatiently, clearly not wanting the spotlight to drift away from his line of questioning. Grandpa stopped a few feet from me, his hand resting lightly on the back of a chair. He studied me for a long moment before turning his gaze to the rest of the family. "All of you," he began, his voice calm but firm, "have made Jason into your target for years. I've sat back, listened to your little jokes, your comparisons, your so-called harmless teasing. And I've watched this boy, this man, say nothing. Do you think that means he was weak? That he was failing? No, he was building." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. My mom's hand fell from her mouth. Emily's eyes widened. Grandpa straightened, his voice growing stronger. I knew. I knew what Jason was working on. He came to me 3 years ago when he was first starting. He asked me for advice, not money, not handouts, advice. He showed me his plans, his spreadsheets, his vision. And I told him then what I'll tell you now. It was brilliant. The hall erupted into hushed whispers. I felt my heart hammer in my chest as Grandpa continued. Jason didn't keep it a secret because he was ashamed. He kept it a secret because he knew most of you would do exactly what you've always done: mock him, belittle him, dismiss him. And I agreed with him. Better to let his work speak for itself. And now, he said, gesturing toward the envelope in my hand, it's ready to do just that. The room was silent again, but the energy had changed completely. My Uncle Greg looked visibly uncomfortable, his smugness slipping into something more like defensiveness. My father's face was tight, his jaw clenched. My mother was fidgeting with her necklace, clearly overwhelmed. And me? My throat tightened, not from nerves this time, but from something closer to relief. For years I'd carried this alone. Now, with my grandfather standing there, I felt like the weight had shifted. It wasn't just me against the room anymore. I opened my mouth to speak, but my dad cut in, his voice sharper than before. "Dad, this is ridiculous. You're taking Jason's side without proof. Anyone can make claims. A business, $1 million. Where's the evidence?" He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "Go on, Jason. Show us this proof. Let's see if it's real." The challenge hung heavy in the air. My fingers tightened on the envelope. This was it. The moment everything could collapse or finally snap into place. I slowly pulled out the papers, the glossy print of the magazine article catching the light. Headlines with my company's name, photos of me standing beside shelves of products, charts showing growth. Gasps and murmurs swept through the hall as I held them up. But before I could pass them around, Greg suddenly barked. So what if he got lucky one year? Businesses fail all the time. Let's not pretend this makes him some kind of hero. Emily earned her degree the right way. That's something no one can take from her. All eyes flicked back to me. The skepticism was creeping back in, clawing its way into the room. Greg's voice had always carried influence, and I knew if I didn't handle this carefully, the tide could turn again. I looked at him calmly, then at the rest of the family, and said, "It's not luck, and it's not just one year. What I've built isn't just about money. It's about proving that I wasn't the failure you all made me out to be. And if you want more proof than this, I have plenty." I slid another sheet out of the envelope. This one wasn't a magazine article. It was something else entirely. Something even I hadn't been sure I'd show tonight. The hall leaned in closer, straining to see what it was. And just as I lifted it into view, Emily suddenly stepped forward and grabbed my wrist. "Jason, stop," she whispered urgently, her voice trembling. The entire hall froze. My sister, who'd always been the golden child, who'd let the jokes about me slide, who'd even joined in herself, was suddenly standing beside me, her hand on my arm, her face pale. "Don't show them that," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I stared at her, stunned. The family began buzzing again, the whispers growing louder, the tension breaking into confusion. My dad's eyes narrowed. My uncle leaned forward. My mom looked between us like she'd seen a ghost. And in that moment, I realized something. Emily knew exactly what I was about to reveal. I looked down at Emily's hand clutching my wrist. Her fingers were trembling, and her usually confident expression was cracked with panic. It was the first time in years I'd seen her unsettled, the first time she didn't look like the untouchable golden child. The whispers around us grew louder, overlapping like a rising tide. People were leaning in, craning their necks to catch every flicker of movement. My dad was glaring. Greg was shifting in his seat with an annoyed scowl, and my mom just looked bewildered. "Jason," Emily whispered again, but louder this time. "Please, don't show them." The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. My stomach knotted. Why would she say that unless she knew exactly what I had in my hand? And more importantly, why was she so desperate to stop me? I pulled my wrist gently but firmly from her grasp, my eyes never leaving hers. "Emily," I said, my voice low but carrying through the silent room, "why are you so afraid of what's in here?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. Her face flushed red, and she looked at the floor. That was all the confirmation I needed. I turned back to the crowd and held up the second document. It wasn't another article or growth chart. It was a contract, a signed partnership agreement between my company and a major corporation, one that everyone in the room would recognize. Their logo was splashed across the top in bold blue letters. It wasn't just some little business milestone. It was a deal that placed me firmly on the map. Gasps rippled through the hall. My uncle's smug expression collapsed into disbelief. My mother clutched her necklace tighter. My father blinked rapidly, his jaw clenching. And Emily, my sister who had just been the star of the night, looked like she might faint. I took a deep breath. "This," I said, holding the contract high, "is proof that what I've built isn't just luck or temporary success. It's recognition from a company all of you know, with a deal that guarantees millions in revenue over the next few years." I wasn't going to show this tonight. I didn't want to overshadow Emily's graduation. But since you've spent the entire evening laughing at me, mocking me, and treating me like I don't belong, I think it's time you all understand that I am not the failure you've made me out to be. The room erupted in a cacophony of voices. Some people gasped in admiration, others whispered frantically to their neighbors, and a few clapped hesitantly. My uncle Greg muttered, "This can't be real," but his voice lacked conviction. My father stayed seated, his face hard, but his silence spoke louder than anything. I turned back to Emily. "You knew about this, didn't you?" I asked, my tone sharp. Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded faintly. The room went dead silent again. "Explain," I demanded. She swallowed hard, her voice breaking as she spoke. I found out a few weeks ago. I overheard Mom talking about it with Grandpa. I didn't tell anyone because..." She glanced nervously at the crowd, then back at me. "Because I was afraid you'd take this moment away from me." The words hit me like a blow, but they made sense. My own sister, who had always basked in the spotlight, had known the truth about my success and said nothing. Worse, she'd still taken a shot at me in her speech, fully aware of what I'd achieved. I shook my head slowly. You let them laugh at me, even knowing the truth? You let Dad keep mocking me, knowing I'd already accomplished more than he ever dreamed? And then you had the nerve to stand here and take another jab at me in front of everyone. Emily's tears spilled over, and she whispered, I didn't mean it like that. But the damage was done. I turned back to the family, my chest burning with a mixture of anger and triumph. You all wanted someone in this family worth celebrating? You've been looking in the wrong direction. While you were worshiping degrees and dismissing me, I was building a future. And now, that future is here. I don't need your approval. I don't need your applause. But I won't sit in silence while you treat me like I'm nothing. For the first time in my life, the room was mine. Every eye was on me, not in pity or mockery, but in stunned silence. The tables had turned completely. And then, my grandfather stepped forward again, placing a hand gently on my shoulder. Jason, he said softly, but loud enough for all to hear. You've done what no one else here had the courage to do. You believed in yourself when no one else would. That is worth more than any degree or toast. Tonight, they should be raising their glasses to you too. The words landed like a hammer. A few relatives actually began clapping, hesitant at first, then stronger. My cousins started nodding, their faces lighting up with admiration. My mom looked conflicted, caught between pride and guilt. My dad, however, stayed frozen, his face tight with suppressed anger. Uncle Greg scoffed loudly, standing up. All right, enough. He's just trying to steal the spotlight. This is Emily's night, not his. But this time, no one laughed with him. No one nodded. His words fell flat. I looked him square in the eye and said, I didn't steal anything. I earned it. The only thing I'm taking tonight is my voice back. The room applauded again, louder this time. Greg sat down, his face red. My father looked like he wanted to argue, but he knew he'd lost the crowd. Emily just stood there, tears streaking her face, caught between shame and something that looked like regret. I lowered the microphone slowly, the adrenaline still coursing through me. For the first time in years, I felt lighter. Not because I'd finally proven them wrong, but because I'd finally spoken my truth. As I stepped off the stage, my grandfather squeezed my shoulder again and whispered, I'm proud of you, son. I smiled faintly, my chest swelling with something I'd craved for years. Not approval from the whole family, but acknowledgement from someone who had always mattered most. The rest of the night carried on awkwardly. Emily's celebration didn't vanish, but the mood had changed. Conversations shifted, glances followed me, and the air was heavy with unspoken apologies. My dad avoided me, my uncle sulked, and my mother hovered, clearly torn. But none of it mattered anymore. I had taken back my place in this family, not as the failure in the corner, but as someone worth listening to. And as I left the hall later that night, contract still tucked under my arm, I realized something important. Their respect, their laughter, their opinions, they didn't define me anymore. They never had. The only thing that defined me was what I had built with my own two hands. And for the first time in my life, I knew they all finally understood that. That was the night the joke stopped. That was the night I stopped being their punchline. That was the night I became someone worth celebrating. I'm Alex, 27 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my family has had a strange way of showing affection. Some families bond over dinners, some over vacations, some over traditions. Mine bonded over control. Or rather, my father's obsession with controlling everything. He was the type who measured respect in assets, who compared worth by who owned what, and who thought loyalty meant obedience. My brother, Daniel, was his golden child, loud, arrogant, constantly in trouble, but somehow always shielded from consequences. And me? I was the quiet one, the one who worked hard, built things on my own, and kept my distance. At least, I thought I had. Until my last birthday. It was supposed to be a simple dinner. Just close family at my parents' house, nothing extravagant. I had already learned to temper my expectations when it came to birthdays. Usually my brother's achievements somehow got highlighted more than my own. But that evening felt different. My father was in a strangely good mood. My mother was buzzing around setting the table, and Daniel, of course, sat there smirking like he knew something I didn't. I should have noticed the signs. I should have known better. But I didn't. When dessert was cleared, my father reached into his jacket, and pulled out an envelope. He slid it across the table to me with a flourish and said, "Consider this your gift." Everyone's eyes turned toward me. For a brief, fleeting second, I thought maybe, just maybe, this was one of those rare moments where he would show genuine generosity. Something thoughtful, a sign that he actually saw me, not just what I could provide. My heart picked up a beat as I tore the envelope open. Inside was a folded document, thick paper, formal fonts, signatures already scrawled in blue ink. My stomach dropped before my brain caught up. It was a property transfer contract. My property, the small two-bedroom apartment I had bought 3 years earlier after working myself nearly into the ground at 2 jobs. The place I had painted with my own hands. The one space that was entirely mine. According to this contract, it was being gifted to Daniel. My father's signature was already there, along with Daniel's. The only blank space was where my name should have been. My pulse roared in my ears as I read the words over and over, trying to make sense of them. I looked up slowly. My father was watching me with that smug little smirk he always wore when he thought he had checkmated me. Daniel leaned back in his chair, grinning like he had already moved in. My mother busied herself with stacking plates, avoiding my eyes entirely. I placed the papers carefully back on the table and said, as calmly as I could manage, "Interesting, because I never signed my part." My father's smirk faltered. Daniel's grin twitched. For a moment, silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating, before my father cleared his throat. "It's just a formality," he said smoothly, as if brushing away a misunderstanding. "You don't really need that apartment, Alex. Daniel's starting a family soon. He needs it more than you. You're still young, you'll find another place. This is what family does. We help each other." Help each other. That phrase rang in my head like a cruel joke. When I struggled through school, working nights just to afford tuition, where was that help? When I was patching leaks in my apartment at 2 in the morning because I couldn't afford a repairman, where was that help? But now, when Daniel, who had never kept a job longer than 6 months, wanted a fully furnished apartment handed to him, suddenly it was all about help. I forced myself to keep my voice even. "So this was your plan all along? To take something I worked for and just reassign it?" My father waved a dismissive hand. "Don't be dramatic. It's still in the family. Think of it as an investment in your brother's future. You'll thank me later." His tone was final, as though he expected me to nod and accept his wisdom like I was still a child. Daniel leaned forward then, his smirk fully returned. "Don't make this difficult, Alex. You're not even using the place properly. Half the time you're at work or staying with friends. I could actually build a life there. You should be proud to contribute." The audacity of it all made my chest tighten. My own brother, looking me in the eye and saying I should be proud to give up everything I had built so he could contribute nothing and still win. My mother finally spoke then, her voice soft but sharp. "It would mean a lot if you signed it, dear. Don't create tension over something small." Small. My home, my sanctuary, reduced to something small. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself. Inside, I was seething. A storm was building, but I knew better than to let it explode then and there. I studied the contract again, then folded it neatly and slipped it back into the envelope. "I'll think about it," I said, my voice controlled. My father seemed satisfied with that answer, mistaking it for surrender. Daniel grinned triumphantly. But inside, I had already made my decision. I wasn't going to let this happen. Not this time. That night, back in my apartment, I sat on the couch staring at the walls I had painted, the shelves I had built, the tiny details that made the place mine. My mind replayed every word, every smirk, every manipulative glance. They thought they had cornered me, that I was too timid to resist, too desperate for their approval to fight back. But they didn't know how much I had grown. They didn't know that years of being overlooked and dismissed had hardened me, had taught me to be patient, to plan, to watch for the perfect opening. I opened my laptop, pulled up the digital copy of my deed, and checked every line. My name was there, clear and unchallenged. My signature was the only one that mattered. Whatever papers my father had drawn up were useless without it. But the fact that he thought he could get away with it, that he could steal from me and call it family duty, burned deeper than anything. I knew this was only the beginning. He wouldn't let it go. Neither would Daniel. And if I wasn't careful, they would find another way to tighten the noose. That was the night I decided. I wouldn't just defend what was mine. I would make sure they never tried to take from me again. But first, I had to play along, just long enough for them to reveal how far they were willing to go. And I didn't have to wait long. The following week, the cracks began to show. My father was never the type to wait patiently when he thought he had leverage, and well, Daniel thrived on rubbing salt in wounds. It started with little things, snide comments, subtle reminders, and attempts to corner me into giving them what they wanted. A few days after the dinner, I stopped by my parents' house to pick up some tools I had stored in their garage. As soon as I walked in, Daniel was sprawled on the couch with his shoes off, watching TV. He muted it just long enough to say, "So, when are you handing me the keys? Might as well save yourself the trouble and get it over with." He said it casually, as though it was already a done deal. I didn't answer. I just grabbed what I needed and left. But my silence only seemed to embolden him. That Friday, I came home to find him standing outside my apartment building, leaning against the front door like he already lived there. "Forgot your spare?" he asked with a grin, jingling a set of keys. My stomach dropped. I'd given my parents a copy when I first bought the place, just in case of emergencies. Somehow, Daniel had gotten his hands on it. I forced myself to stay calm, though inside I was furious. "You shouldn't be here," I told him flatly. He shrugged. "Relax. I was just checking out my future place. Dad said it's only a matter of time." I figured I might as well get used to the neighborhood. I wanted to rip the keys out of his hand right then, but I knew that would only feed the fire. Instead, I unlocked the door myself and stepped inside. "Get out, Daniel. Now." He lingered a moment, smirking, before finally leaving. But the message was clear. He wasn't going to stop pushing. Over the next week, the pressure grew. My mother called me one evening, her voice dripping with forced sweetness. "Alex, honey, I think you should really consider signing those papers. It would mean so much to your father. He's been working on securing Daniel's future, and this is part of it. Don't make things harder than they need to be." I could hear the rehearsed nature of her words, like she was reciting lines from my father's script. My father himself was less subtle. He called me the next day, his voice sharp with impatience. "This isn't up for debate, Alex. You'll sign. It's family property anyway, not just yours. You wouldn't even have it if it weren't for the support we gave you." Support? The only thing they had ever given me was doubt and criticism. That apartment existed because of my work, my late nights, my sacrifices. But arguing with him was useless. He wasn't calling to discuss. He was calling to declare. I started noticing little intrusions after that. One Saturday morning, I came home from grocery shopping and found Daniel's car parked in my spot. When I knocked on his window, he just rolled it down, sunglasses perched on his nose, and said, "Just keeping it warm for myself." Another time, I found my living room window slightly open, even though I never left it that way. A picture frame was tilted on the shelf, and I could have sworn the position of my mail on the counter had shifted. It was subtle, but enough to make my skin crawl. Daniel had been inside. I began changing locks, adding a deadbolt, and keeping my important documents tucked away in a locked box. My father noticed the changes when he stopped by unannounced one afternoon. He frowned at the new lock and muttered, "Paranoid, aren't we?" I didn't answer, but inside, I knew they were testing boundaries, pushing, waiting for me to crack. The emotional toll was heavier than I expected. Every day felt like a battle of wills. At work, I struggled to focus, knowing Daniel might be snooping around my place. At night, I lay awake replaying conversations, wondering how far my father was willing to go. I was angry, yes, but beneath that was something deeper, a gnawing sense of betrayal. The people who were supposed to support me were plotting against me, and worse, they didn't even see it as wrong. One evening, I visited my parents for dinner out of obligation. The conversation started out normal enough, my mother fussing over food, my father asking perfunctory questions about my job. Then, midway through the meal, my father casually said, "I've already told some of our relatives that Daniel is moving into your apartment. They're very supportive. They think it's the right thing to do. Don't embarrass us by dragging this out." Daniel laughed, clinking his glass against mine. "Yeah, don't make this awkward, Alex. Just sign. Everyone's expecting it." Something inside me snapped, though I didn't show it. Outwardly, I smiled politely, excused myself, and drove home in silence. But in my mind, I was already laying out the pieces of a plan. If they wanted to play games, I'd play. But I wasn't going to be the one who lost. The next morning, I made an appointment with a lawyer. And that was when things really started to spiral. Walking into the lawyer's office felt surreal. I'd never imagined I would need to take legal action against my own family, but by then, the tension had built to a point where I couldn't ignore it anymore. I explained the situation to Mr. Lawson, an older man with sharp eyes who had clearly seen every flavor of family dispute. He listened patiently as I laid out the details, my father presenting me with a pre-signed contract, Daniel using the spare key to sneak into my apartment, the increasing pressure to hand everything over. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. Your name is on the deed, correct? You hold the mortgage, you pay the bills. I nodded. Then let me make this perfectly clear. They cannot touch it without your consent. What they're doing isn't just manipulative, it's borderline harassment. You have every right to shut this down immediately. His words should have comforted me, but instead they lit a fire. If I had all the power here, then my father and brother's games weren't just cruel, they were desperate. They wanted me to believe I was powerless, when in reality, I held all the cards. Before I left, Mr. Lawson gave me a piece of advice that stuck with me. Don't confront them directly. Let them dig their own hole. Document everything. Every call, every visit, every intrusion. If they step over the line, we'll have more than enough to act. And sure enough, the very next week, they did. It was a Tuesday evening when I came home from work and noticed the lock on my door looked off. The shiny new deadbolt I'd installed had scratches around it, like someone had tried, and failed, to pick it. My stomach churned as I unlocked the door and stepped inside. At first glance, nothing seemed missing. But then I walked into my bedroom and froze. The drawer where I kept my documents had been rifled through. Papers were scattered across the floor, bank statements, utility bills, and most importantly, the lockbox that held my deed. It was gone. My chest tightened as I stood there, staring at the empty space where it had been. Panic surged, but quickly gave way to cold clarity. Only two people would be bold enough to do this. My father and Daniel. I called my father immediately, my voice low and steady. Did you take something from my apartment? He didn't even bother denying it. I had to, Alex. You weren't cooperating. You're being stubborn, and this is bigger than you. The sooner you accept that, the better. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles whitened. You broke into my home. You stole from me. Stole, he scoffed. Don't be ridiculous. That apartment is family property. We're just putting it to better use. Daniel will be moving in next month. Stop making this difficult for everyone. I couldn't even find words at first. My own father, calmly admitting he'd crossed a line I thought even he wouldn't dare approach. He wasn't just pushing anymore. He was taking. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying his words, Daniel's smug grin, my mother's silence. I thought about all the years of being second best, of being told I should be more like Daniel, of working twice as hard for half the recognition. And now they had the audacity to take the one thing I had carved out for myself. By morning, my panic had burned down to something sharper. Determination. They thought they had won, that by stealing my deed, they had stripped me of power. What they didn't realize was that the deed itself was only paper. The true records, the ones that mattered, were digital, legal, and untouchable. What they had taken was worthless without me. Still, the violation ran deep. I felt like a stranger in my own home, constantly checking locks, peering out windows at every sound. At work, I caught myself staring blankly at my screen, thinking of Daniel walking through my rooms, pawing through my belongings like he owned them. The following weekend, my parents invited me over again. I considered refusing, but something in me wanted to see how far they would go now that they thought they had leverage. When I arrived, Daniel was already there, lounging at the table with his arm draped over the back of a chair, smug as ever. My father greeted me like nothing was wrong, as though we hadn't spoken on the phone days earlier. Halfway through dinner, he cleared his throat and said, "We've already started preparing Daniel's move. It'll be easier if you bring the rest of the documents over this week. The transition needs to be smooth." I set my fork down, meeting his eyes. "You mean the documents you already stole?" Daniel snorted. "Oh, come on, Alex. Don't act like it's theft. You're being selfish. You live alone, you don't need that much space. I'll put it to better use." My father nodded approvingly at him, then turned back to me. "This isn't a debate anymore. The family has decided." Something inside me shifted then. They weren't even hiding the manipulation. They weren't ashamed or cautious or worried about consequences. They believed they were untouchable, and that was their mistake. I leaned back in my chair, forcing a calm I didn't feel. You really think you can take this from me? That you can just decide it's not mine anymore? It's already decided, my father said, his voice final. Don't embarrass yourself by fighting it. My mother reached out, her voice barely above a whisper. Please, Alex, just sign. Don't make things harder than they have to be. For the first time, I smiled, not out of happiness, but because I finally saw them clearly. Their arrogance, their desperation, their complete blindness to the fact that I was no longer the obedient son they could push around. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, interesting. Daniel laughed, thinking I was surrendering. My father relaxed, certain he had won. But deep down, I already knew. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. And when the tables turned, they wouldn't even see it coming. After that dinner, I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I had always known my father favored Daniel, but this was the first time I realized he didn't just prefer him. He was willing to sacrifice me for him. Every childhood memory suddenly felt heavier in hindsight. The way Daniel's failures were always brushed aside. The way my accomplishments were met with a shrug. The way I was always told I'd understand later why he got more. Now I understood. And it wasn't love. It was entitlement. The days that followed were some of the darkest I'd ever experienced. I barely ate. I barely slept. Every time I came home, I felt like my walls had eyes, like Daniel or my father had been inside while I was gone. I even caught myself checking my dresser drawers, my closets, the placement of my mugs in the kitchen. When you realize your family is willing to violate your most private spaces, nothing feels safe anymore. One night, after tossing and turning until dawn, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the cold light of my laptop screen. I pulled up my bank account, my utility bills, my mortgage history, every piece of proof that tied me to this apartment. For hours, I just scrolled, screenshotting, saving, compiling everything into a neatly organized folder. It wasn't just about protecting myself anymore. It was about preparation. But even as I planned, the weight of betrayal sat heavy on my chest. There was a moment, one I don't admit easily, when I thought about giving in, just signing the papers, handing it over, and cutting ties forever. I thought about how much easier it would be to not fight, to walk away, to let Daniel have his hollow victory. I imagined myself in some other city, renting some bland little place, starting fresh with no contact. But every time I pictured it, I saw Daniel's smirk, my father's satisfied nod, their belief that they had broken me. And that thought sparked something I hadn't felt in weeks. Anger strong enough to burn through despair. That's when the rise began. I stopped waiting for their next move and started planning mine. I met with Mr. Lawson again, this time with a binder full of evidence. He flipped through the photos of my ransacked drawer, the record of the new deadbolt I'd installed, the call logs from my father demanding I sign. His expression hardened with every page. They've already crossed several lines, he said. If they try anything else, we'll take them apart in court. But I didn't want court, at least not right away. I wanted something quieter, sharper. I wanted them to feel the same fear I had felt in my own home. To know what it was like to believe the ground under their feet wasn't theirs anymore. So I started playing along. When Daniel called me one night to ask if I'd finally come to my senses, I kept my voice neutral. Maybe. I'm still thinking about it. He laughed like a man who believed he had already won. Meanwhile, I put the rest of my plan into motion. I filed an official police report about the break-in, naming both Daniel and my father as suspects. I installed a small, hidden camera in my living room, something cheap but effective, and I moved my most important documents into a safe deposit box at the bank. A week later, the trap sprung itself. I came home one evening to find my front door ajar. My heart pounded as I pushed it open. Inside, Daniel stood in the middle of my living room, holding a cardboard box filled with my belongings. His eyes widened when he saw me, but instead of guilt, his face twisted into annoyance. "You weren't supposed to be here yet," he muttered. "What are you doing?" I asked, though the answer was obvious. "Moving my stuff in," he said casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Dad said I should just start. You'll come around eventually." I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I simply walked over to the side table where the small camera was hidden behind a photo frame. Quietly, I pressed the button that saved the last 10 minutes of footage. "Interesting," I said softly, and walked right past him into my bedroom. His laughter followed me down the hall, cocky and careless. The next morning, I met with Mr. Lawson again, this time sliding the memory card across his desk. He watched the footage with grim satisfaction. This, he said, is breaking and entering. This is theft. And this is exactly what we needed. Within 48 hours, Daniel was served with a restraining order. The look on his face when he realized the law wasn't on his side was something I'll never forget. Gone was the smirk, replaced by genuine shock, as though the universe itself had betrayed him. My father exploded, of course, leaving me a string of voicemails that grew angrier by the hour. My mother's voice, softer but no less manipulative, followed. Alex, how could you do this to your brother? To us. But for once, I didn't waver. The court process moved faster than I expected. With the video evidence, the police report, and my lawyer's meticulous documentation, it was a clean case. Daniel had trespassed, attempted to take possession of property that wasn't his, and openly admitted to doing so under my father's encouragement. The judge didn't just grant the restraining order. He made it clear that any further attempts would result in criminal charges. For the first time, my father's confidence cracked. At the hearing, he tried to bluster about family matters and misunderstandings, but the judge cut him off. This is not about family, he said firmly. This is about property rights. And Mr. Alex's rights are the only ones that matter here. Hearing those words felt like a weight lifting from my chest. For years, my father's word had been law in our family. Now, finally, someone with real authority was telling him he wasn't king of everything. The fallout was brutal, at least for them. Daniel had to find another place to live, one he could actually afford. My father's reputation in the family circle took a hit when everyone learned he had tried to steal from his own son. My mother, well, she stopped calling for a while. As for me, I started to breathe again. My apartment became mine in more than just name. It became a fortress, a symbol of the fact that I could stand up for myself and win. I redecorated, repainted the walls, and replaced every single lock in the place. It felt like closing a chapter. But the best part came a few weeks later, at another family dinner I reluctantly attended. My father, still simmering, couldn't resist a jab. So, Alex, enjoying your little kingdom? I met his gaze calmly, the way I had at my birthday. Very much, I said. Then I leaned forward just enough for only him and Daniel to hear. Funny thing about kingdoms, though? They only belong to the people strong enough to defend them. The table went quiet. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. My father's jaw tightened. And for the first time in my life, I felt no fear, no guilt, no hesitation. Because the truth was simple. They had tried to strip me of everything. And in doing so, they had given me something far more powerful. A backbone. And they would never take that from me again.